like something that like Team America World Police would play or some shit.
This song's gonna be stuck in your head.
It's too bad I don't know any of the lyrics.
This is Bosnia Kavaglav. Am I pronouncing that right? Bosnia Kavaglav.
Bosnia.
Probably not.
Bosnia.
That is a Bosnia Kavaglav. No, well, even if I'm mispronouncing that name, it's still going to be stuck in your head.
Yep.
It's going to be, I guarantee you. I'll put the link in so someone can listen to it. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda and Danny Abdeljabbar, and we're just listening to Yugoslavian breakup music.
That's a really great way to put it.
Yeah, Yugoslavian breakup music. So something I like to share, and I share this with people on the Patreon all the time. I love listening to like nationalist songs, like these ethnic nationalist songs. Like there's one from that Sod song. Well, I guess that's not really ethnic. That's more of like a bath party nationalist song, but it's really interesting. And there was all these Yugoslavian war songs that were created, during the breakup of Yugoslavia. So all these different ethnic groups, like the Serbians had their songs, and then the Croats had their songs, and the Bosnians had their songs, and the Slovenians had their songs, and it was like a war of music.
Yep,
it's really
and the
bizarre.
The music videos are clutch. They're just like, look at our cool soldiers, and I'm in a tank, and I'm gonna jump over this fence with this like machine gun. It's like, I don't know. It's so like they were trying so hard to look cool.
Roki
you want to play that other
Volovic.
one?
This is my shit. Roki Volovic.
Yeah, this one's got a good beat. I actually kind of like this one.
This is the pro Bosnian Serb song.
Yeah, you want to play it? All right, let's do it. I did this, what is this, accordion? I dig this.
Panthers.
Yo, what's up with this dude with the sunglasses, yo? I love when the beat drops. You like that part?
Yeah. You are brave boys. Your accomplishments are proven. The time has shown that you're real fighters. I'm reading the translation.
English translation. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're so bizarre and they're so interesting. You need to watch the videos. And there's a YouTube video of somebody breaking down like the origins of all these, like the record label and all this. It's really interesting. I'll try to find that and put that in the notes. But today, the reason why we're playing this music. Oh, by the way, we did something. We talked about this type of music before when we were doing our episode on Armenia and Azerbaijan. Remember the war of music that was going on? Those music videos.
Yeah. Those were pretty cool too, actually.
All right. Well, the reason why we're playing that is because we're talking about we're going to be talking about the current conflict going on in Bosnia. A lot of you guys have been asking us to talk about this, and there's just so many things to talk about. It's hard to kind of drill down, and I think today we're going to be talking about kind of like a higher level version of this. I guess we'll be addressing the conflict right now with the potential secession of the Serbian faction of the government over there, because that's been going on. But we figured we can give a high level overview of the history of the region, and go ahead.
Sorry, Sorry, I just figured I wanted to say out loud that we spent the last 20 minutes discussing like what angles we can pursue, and we're intentionally going to leave a lot of stuff out because there's even things that we just don't quite understand yet. And for me personally, reading and doing research on this particular area, I feel like this Balkan region is as difficult for me to pin down as, even right down to the geography of it all, is as hard for me to figure out which states are which, as like, I don't know, looking in the center of the United States and trying to pin down which states are which there, and that just kind of like a high level, overview of if I can't figure out where all the states are, I definitely am going to have some trouble following all the history behind it too. And it's fascinating reading all about the different ethnicities and kind of the diasporas that are all over the place and how that relates to the nationalization and the creations of nation states and national identities kind of around that very mixed, diverse place,
Well, when we talk about today's episode, I think it will be more of kind of like a 101 version of it. We're not going to go into every single ethnic cleansing campaign. So forgive us. We're not trying to intentionally leave out, different ethnic cleansing campaigns that have gone on. We're just trying to do more of like a 101 high level thing. But if you guys want, we'll continue to do episodes on this and try to, because it's impossible to do something on in an hour and a half. On the breakup of Yugoslavia and the Balkanization of that region. But something that we talk about a lot is we use the term Balkanization a lot in different episodes. And typically when we talk about Balkanization, we're phrasing it as a potential political solution to some type of internal conflict caused by either an ethnic or a sectarian division. Hell, I mean, partisanship in the United States is becoming so sectarian that you could even talk about it as a potential political solution here in the U.S.
Right.
I mean, there's already maps online that you can find, how can we actually divide the United States so people don't want to kill each other anymore.
Right.
But to balkanize a country,
the bigger question is should we
to
too?
divide a country up into smaller, ethnically or sectarian homogeneous states. And the term comes from the end of World War I. So it was used to describe the ethnic and political fragmentation that followed the partition of the Ottoman Empire. Specifically though in the Balkans, because the Ottoman Empire stretched from the Middle East to the Balkan regions, and that's hence where the word Balkanization comes from, like the partition of the Ottoman lands that were in the Balkan Peninsula. However, Balkanization can take place as a term. It can take place anywhere. So. An example that you could use that we've been talking about a lot is Ethiopia. It certainly seems like Ethiopia may be on a road to some sort of balkanizations with the war up north in the Tigray region. And there are many different ethnic groups in the government they set up, the ethnic federal government they set up. It seems like almost a recipe for an eventual secession and balkanization of the different zones. But right now, the reason why we're going to introduce this is because there's a political crisis in Bosnia and Herzegovina, aka Bosnia, and Milorad Dodik. So he's a Serb member of Bosnia's presidency. Last month, he announced that the country's Serb-run entity, the Republika Srpska, will leave Bosnian state institutions.
So I just want to stop you right there because this is the first thing that really confused the hell out of me that I'm sure at least some people that are listening to this will be confused about. When we're talking about Bosnia, Herzegovina, or Bosnia just generally, we're talking about a sovereign nation state that has a internal Serbian-run entity within it. But that is distinctly different from Serbia, the other nation state, right?
That is correct. So let me try to break this down. So the Serbian part of the government is trying to or they say they want to reach full autonomy within the country. And what this does, it violates a peace accord in 1995 called the Dayton Peace Accords that ended the Bosnian War. The Dayton Peace Accords, they split Bosnia into two administrative entities. So you have the Serb-run entity, which is the Republika Srpska, and then the Bosnian Croat-dominated federation entity. And this is confusing because the terminology as the Republic and the Federation, they're just parts of the states. They're not states in themselves. Mm-hmm. And what makes this more confusing is that after the war, the state was actually under military occupation of NATO and under oversight of the UN. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and to make it even more confusing, is that the fact that there is a Serbian state all by itself that's not related, I guess, in this respect to Bosnia. So maybe a better question is just like, well, how did this crisis start?
Yeah, well, we'll get into why there's Serbs everywhere in the Balkans. Mm-hmm. But the way how this conflict started is, well, this is what the press is saying, is that Dodik has been threatening to leave Bosnia for a while now, but the current threat of secession stems from a decision that was made in July in the Bosnian government to ban genocide denial. So in response, this is like the New York Times version of it, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it. In response, Dodik said that the Republic of Srpska is going to pull out all of their armed forces. They're going to pull their military out of the armed forces, and then some other administrative parts of the government, like the tax administration office and like the judiciary body. And he also said that Bosnian security and intelligence agencies, they're going to be banned from operating in the Republika Srpska, and they're going to be replaced by Serb-only institutions.
So let me get that straight then. You're saying that the Serbian Republik Srpska in Bosnia is pulling out ostensibly because Dodik doesn't like the idea of not being able to genocide deny? Is that the going narrative?
That's kind of like the immediate response. That's kind of like the latest escalation of it, but he's been saying that they want to leave for a long time. So it's not like this is like the cause of it. This is just kind of like the catalyst, the latest reason why there's like a more, significant threat to leave the country. But, I think it makes sense to go over the background. So you have to stem this back to Yugoslavia, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. It was made up of 6 republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Serbia, and then Bosnia Herzegovina. And Bosnia was recognized as an independent state in the early months of 1992, an event which triggered the escalation of violence and plunged the country into a civil war that lasted 3.5 years. Now, the political solution that ends this war is complex. So the U.S., they brokered a deal in December of 1995 that officially ends the war in Bosnia. And like I said earlier, the deal split the country into a two-tiered government. So the Serb-run entity and then the Bosniak Croat-dominated entity. And maybe I should go over the history of Yugoslavia to explain how all these countries were created in the first place. So, like I said earlier, these countries were part of the former Yugoslavia, which was ran by a strongman dictator for years, Tito. And the Balkan Peninsula is so just like kind of envision it, because I know you said that you're having trouble like kind of figuring out like what state is which, because
the geography is kind of hard.
The geography. So if you look at the Balkan Peninsula, it's bordered by the Adriatic Sea in the northwest, the Ionian Sea in the southwest, the Aegean Sea in the south, and the Turkish Straits in the east, and then through the northeast is the Black Sea. So you can imagine, like historically, this was an area that was highly significant to regional superpowers. So
Right.
this land, this peninsula, on the southern tip of it, there's Greece. This was in fact part of the Roman Empire. It was called the province of Illyricum. And the nucleus of this area has always been Serbia, which was settled around like the 7th century by South Slav migrants who eventually convert to Christianity in the 9th century. And in the 1300s, the Serbians were at a medieval high mark. And during their reign, with Stefan Dusan, allegedly the Serbian Empire ruled over this large chunk of the Balkan Peninsula. However, 30 years after Stefan Dusan dies, the Ottoman Turks conquered the Serbian Empire, and they basically absorb all of their different peoples that were under their empire. So, have you ever heard of the Battle of Kosovo? We've talked about this in our World War I episodes, and
This is the one where everyone dies, right?
so yeah, it's a large, and this is like we don't really. It's hard to take the mythology out of the historical facts. There is a lot of mythology surrounding this battle, but it's kind of a legendary moment. It's this large-scale pitched battle between the Serbians and the Ottomans where everyone in the battlefield allegedly dies. Everyone's fighting to the very last breath. And, the Serbians are fighting the Turks to the very last man. Prince Lazar of Serbia, he heroically fights to the last breath, fighting off these Turkish janissaries. And this battle... the reason why Serbia, it's not that Serbia lost this battle, it's because they expended all of their forces in this one battle, and then after that they didn't really have anything left, and that's how the Ottomans were able to go on and wage war and
Well, I got a
conquer
question
the rest
about
of
that.
What?
I got a question about that. So, if everybody died, who was there? Who was able to tell the story?
I don't know. That's why it's
Somebody had to
shrouded
live,
in
right?
history.
Right?
I'm
So
sure
it was
some
just
people.
like some
there
random
was-
goat farmer walks up on a field and sees just like thousands of people just dead, and was like, "Oh, I guess everyone died in this battle."
Who was
And then he goes back and tells people.
what's the guy who's supposed to tell the story in 300? What's the?
Oh yeah,
he's a-
yeah. I forget his name, but I know who you're talking about. And he
Yeah, I
goes
forget
back
the Greek.
to Athens or some shit like that to recruit the rest of them to fight against the Persians, right? Mm-hmm. Had to have been at least one guy to go back and tell the story. To be
All right.
honest.
Well, let's just
Otherwise,
assume
how
there
did
was
he get the
one
story?
guy. There was the exact same moment played out in the movie 300 in the Battle of Kosovo. Let's just
I'd
pretend
like to see.
that
Honestly,
that
I'd
was
like
the
to see a
case.
historical fiction movie about this, like 300. I think it would be badass, actually.
Well, there's plenty in Serbia. They
Yeah, I'm
reenact the battle. They reenact the Battle of Kosovo, on its anniversary, frequently. And let me actually make the point here that this battle allegedly took place on June 28th, 1389, which is a very significant holiday in Serbia. It's very significant to Serbian national identity. It's celebrated as the battle. The battle's celebrated as Saint Vitus Day. So, and what's interesting about this is that June 28th is a date that is a lot of important events fall on June 28th, not 1389, but June 28th in general. So, on June 28th in 1876, Serbia declares war on the Ottoman Empire, which eventually leads to their independence. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated on June 28th, 1914. It's also a day that is historically used by Serbian politicians and monarchs to foster some type of ethnic nationalism or to make some big political move. But pulling this back to Serbia and in their eventual independence, they get their independence in 1878. So for centuries,
From the Ottomans.
they're under Ottoman rule for many, many years. And Bosnia were two lands conquered by the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. So Bosnia was in 1463, and Herzegovina was conquered in about 20 years later, and the people united into one administrative district by the Turks. So, hence the name. It's a double country name. But many of these people convert to Islam. That's why the Bosniaks are predominantly Muslim. And unlike Serbia, Bosnia doesn't get its independence after the Conference of Berlin in 1878. They become part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this directly leads to the events of World War I, at least, the kind of the pop-off moment, the counter peg.
The Black Hand.
The Black Hand, yeah, exactly. So, Bosnia's capital is Sarajevo, which is where Archduke Ferdinand is assassinated. But Serbia, in the 20th century, becomes a cauldron of ultranationalists. So there's like secret societies. A big idea in Serbia was the idea of a greater Serbia, which was a very pseudo mystical, ultra nationalist idea. And the tenets were, we need to restore greater Serbia, the greater Serbia of the pre-Ottoman Empire. Now, the idea of a greater Serbia was just the expansive concept of what a greater Serbia was. Because when you're dealing with like long history or history that's really foggy and murky, you don't really know what's real and what's not real. There's really no historical
where Serbia begins and ends.
You're dealing with you're dealing with like mythology. I mean, let's just be real. You're dealing with mythology. There's a lot of things that are exaggerated. And some of these radicals considered things like every spot on which a Serbian Orthodox church ever existed was Serbian territory. Or there was a phrase in this time where wherever a Serb lived was Serbian territory.
Right. We talked about this in our episode on the origins of World War I. You can go back and listen to that if you're interested.
Yeah, we go deeper into that. And it's actually a really, really interesting story. Serbia in that time period in the 1800s was divided. It wasn't divided, but while it was an Ottoman vassal state, it was ruled by these two families that would just constantly assassinate each other. It was really interesting. And then one would assassinate, one prince, and then another prince would be the opposite family would be assassinated. It was very interesting, and it was just if you're interested in like stories about like regicide and political assassinations, that is just nonstop political violence.
It's very Montague and Capulet.
Yeah, exactly. Is a perfect way to describe it. But those two families, it's interesting seeing all the different dynamics that played into the beginning of World War I, which leads to World War II. But a lot of it starts here in this area. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other geopolitical things that have been going on between, Germany's isolation and stuff like that, and them being the new kids on the block. But a lot of at least what the initial shots and what caused the shots were all started, down to the ethnic tensions that were going on in the Balkan region. But I guess where was I? I'm rambling. So. After the collapse of, let me actually pull this back to these ultranationalist societies. So they actually started increasing their activities outside of Serbia and into the Austrian provinces of Bosnia, and they recruit a team of Bosnian fanatics to kill Archduke Ferdinand, and that's what cascades into World War I. Like Gavrilo Princip was in his that group. They were young. The young Bosnians were young Bosnian Serbs who were recruited by Serbian intelligence agencies like the Black Hand to assassinate Archduke Ferdinand. But after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so the multinational state of Yugoslavia was basically just patched together in 1918. under the name the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. And they annexed the old Austro-Hungarian lands of Slovenia, Croatia, as well as the ethnically Croatian and Serbian lands of Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Kosovo. And these nationalities, they coexisted pretty much in a state of mutual hostility. And what it does, it provokes a royal dictatorship that was instituted by King Alexander in 1929, where the name officially changes to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And King Alexander ends up being assassinated in 1934 by a Bulgarian nationalist group that was allegedly financed by fascist Italy, because the Kingdom of Yugoslavia and Italy had these different rivalries over mainly the supremacy of Albania. But what's interesting about this assassination of King Alexander in 1934, it's the first assassination that's ever caught on camera.
Yep.
And it is bizarre. I sent you the video before.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was crazy. Obviously hard
The
to see anything.
commentary
It's
is
not
the
like
craziest thing.
Yeah, the guy who's doing that commentary is like making, like, ratcheting it up, and he's like, how he was talking about, all right, so they're, they set the scene. He comes off of a cruiser, right? They get on a smaller boat, they go to the shore, and then he gets in a car, and it's like it's him and some other high level like political dude, and they're both in this car, and they have this like quasi motorcade. And, they got, like, horseback riders on front, and there's, like, police lining the streets, holding the crowds back. Mostly everyone's chanting, like, go Yugoslavia, go Alexander, And then you just hear these shots ring out, and then the camera gets all crazy. You can't really see too much there, but, I mean, even in today, it'd be kind of difficult to see that. And, then you see, him dying in the car, and apparently the crowd goes nuts and goes and gets the shooter. And the shooter tried to kill himself, but they didn't let him, and they were going to beat him to fucking death. And I actually don't know how that story ends, because I only got to see this video, and it ends before they tell me whether or not they actually did that. But it was pretty fascinating, dude. It was interesting. Old 1930s, like, flick with, like, a very interesting narrator. Kind of like that.
Oh, he's so regal. He's such a regal. The king is like the king of Yugoslavia, King Alexander, with his beautiful wife. He is such a regal, wonderful king. Oh, he is shot.
He's been shot, people. And the crowds are crazy.
He's like, oh, he's been shot. But it was like he called it like it was like, oh, like a double play.
Yeah,
it wasn't like in horror.
Right?
It was like oh, he's been shot. Like it was, or like a like a a strikeout, or someone drops a fly ball. Like, he drops a fly ball.
Yeah, he said it just so matter of fact, like, and it was obviously after the fact too. They did the overdub after, but like,
yeah,
it was
I
just,
know. Maybe I'll play it so you guys can hear it. I think it's something interesting. It's a throwback to another time, and I guess it's really not that long ago. It's 1934, almost 100 years ago, I guess. But I'll play it.
You are about to see the most amazing pictures ever made. The assassination of King Alexander of Yugoslavia. The ill-fated ruler, arriving in Marseille aboard the Yugoslavian cruiser Dubrovnik, is visiting France on a mission of extreme importance. The final move in critical negotiations, he hopes, will cement the goodwill relationships of Yugoslavia, Italy, and France, and banish the specter of war from the Adriatic and Middle Europe. As he hastens ashore, where thousands are waiting to greet him and welcome him to France, the Balkan ruler is in a happy mood. He is on the eve of his greatest triumph, international amity for his country in the family of nations. And what a welcome he gets as he sets foot on French soil on the Quai des Belges in the ancient French port. He's to be escorted in regal fashion through the city to the railroad station, accompanied by the aged French foreign minister, Louis Barthou, mastermind of Europe's tangled diplomacy. To Barthou, too, the morrow in Paris promises the fruition of his greatest work for France, the building of a Latin Slavic bulwark across southern Europe against Germany and Hitlerism. And so the Balkan monarch and the revered French statesman begin their fateful ride, the ride of death, little dreaming of the terrible catastrophe that awaits them a block or so away. Police line the streets and a mounted escort rides ahead, but no trouble is expected. It's a gala day in Marseille. Vive Alexander! Vive le Roi! Oh, they've been shot. He is dying and Bartho's fatally wounded. The crowd is infuriated. The police can't hold them. It's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Pandemonium has broken loose. The mob is out to beat the man to death. They'll do it, too.
Now, Hitler invaded Yugoslavia in 1941. So, when Hitler invades, German troops are actually welcomed in Croatia as liberators from the Serbs. So, in World War II, Hitler really had no more willing executioners than the Croatians. Like, they were pretty terrible. In Balkans, in Croatia, 2 genocides occurred simultaneously together in Croatia during World War II. One that targeted the Serbs, and then another one that targeted the Jews.
Where it was like 800,000 or something like that died, right?
I don't know the exact number.
It was a very high number.
It's hard. I mean, I don't like. It's hard to quote what the actual numbers are, but I mean the numbers I saw is like with Jews, it's like 90% of them were killed in Croatia. I'm really not sure what the exact numbers are though, of people who are ethnically cleansed, but they were.
I also read
they
that
were very brutal.
That the ways that, because they had a concentration camp set up out there too, and apparently the ways that they were executing both Serbs and Jews and other undesirables, as they would call them, were so gruesome and brutal that even the Nazi officers that would go and like inspect the camps were like themselves disgusted, which is saying a lot. If you can get that kind of reaction out of a Nazi, then he must be doing something brutal.
Yeah, I've read that as well, that the Nazis were grossed out by how the Croatians ran their concentration camps, which is it's like what?
It's like must have been pretty fucked up.
Yeah, it must have been pretty bad.
Yeah.
Then again, the Nazis also condemned the Japanese. Well, not the Nazis. A Nazi was condemning the Japanese invasion
what they were
of
doing in
Nanking.
Yeah.
There's a book on it called the Good Man of Nanking. It's about a Nazi. It's a strange book because it's about a Nazi, a guy, a bona fide Hitler Nazi, who is like the hero of this book, who's saving Chinese refugees and Chinese women from being raped from Japanese soldiers.
I mean, as it goes with Nazis, it's generally the pot calling the kettle black. They basically reflect what they do.
Well,
tragedy.
So when and just to get back to this, so when Hitler invades Yugoslavia, resistance there's two resistance groups that hate each other. So there's a Serbian royalist Chetniks, and then who are loyal to the monarchy, and then there's the partisans,
to the Yugoslav kingdom. Mm-hmm.
The partisans, which are a group of pan-Yugoslav communists, and they're not Serbian nationalists. They're anti-German forces, and they're led by Joseph Broz Tito, who is the strongman dictator. Now, the partisans are in Yugoslavia, and I'm no expert on World War II or anything like that, or the resistance in Nazi Germany or in different theaters in Europe, but high level, I've read that the Yugoslavian partisan forces were probably the most effective resistance movements in occupied Europe during World War II. Yeah. They actually, like, a lot of resistance movements to the Nazis were kind of like nuisances, but in Yugoslavia, the partisans there were just real problems, like real problems that really impacted like the European theater. Now, by the end of World War II, something like 2 million Yugoslavs had died in that region. and
Pretty brutal.
Many more were homeless. It was very brutal. And the partisan leader, Tito, he becomes a new dictator of Yugoslavia. Now, Tito, he creates the Federal Republic, or the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia, and Bosnia was made one of Yugoslavia's 6 republics, along with Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro, Macedonia. Kosovo comes later, after like the initial breakup, but he is pretty hard on the Chetnik resistance, as well as the different Slovene. There's different ethnic resistance. He's hard on them. When they first formed this country. But what's interesting about Tito is that he actually refused to permit Yugoslavia to become a satellite state for the Soviet Union. So he actually expels all the Russian military advisors in there. And he expels he was expelled from the Comintern, like the Soviet International, converting people to communist groups. But he actually looks to the West, and he starts to permit levels of private ownership of land in the industrial sectors. So they're not completely communist, which actually does help lift Yugoslavia into ranks of semi-developed countries.
Yeah, I actually found this part kind of interesting and did a little bit of digging into it, because it sounds like, at least this stage of Yugoslavia, trust me, there were plenty of questionable and bad things that were going on. Obviously, one of them being that there were a dictatorship, but there was kind of a lot of interesting good things coming out of it, and they were this weird middle ground between socialism, but socialism that wasn't Soviet, and nationalism, but nationalism that wasn't based around a particular ethnic identity. It was kind of interesting. So after World War II, Yugoslavia was obviously very multi-ethnic, and it was kind of a success economically. I read that between 1960 and 1980, it actually had a really high growth rate, decent standard of living. Apparently they had free medical care, free education, guaranteed jobs, which I didn't read too much about, but there was some mention there that if you wanted a job and you live in Yugoslavia, you had a job. Also, some things that the socialists here in the United States would like a lot: a month of free paid vacation. Also, things like
they would like a year of free paid vacation.
Well, that's outside of the norm generally, but especially in this time, a month of paid free vacation.
You hear about the no work movement?
Yeah, I have actually, and it's kind of in my opinion counterproductive. But let's not go
get
down
a
that
job.
A couple other things. They had programs for affordable housing. They had affordable transportation, utilities, things like that. So people were living pretty good. They had a super high literacy rate, apparently over 90%, which is very high, especially in that time. Life expectancy averaged about 72. And most of the economy was in the public sector and not in the for-profit sector, which, for better or for worse, worked out for them at the time, at least. And then, this is all stuff that's interesting because, capitalism and just global capitalism, generally speaking, kind of runs contrary to that. Especially, having most of the economy run by a state, or in the public sector rather than privatized and for profit. But it was kind of allowed to exist in general because it was a buffer, as you pointed out, to the Soviet states, because they did deny, becoming a satellite. So they were this strange middle, child of, socialist or socialist-esque social welfare programs, but at the same time, not Soviet, not communist, and also not capitalist, and also a dictatorship, but also somehow they were an economic success. It was kind of a weird blend of shit that didn't seem to make sense, but it did at the time. So,
well, they kind of were like a second tier, or like the leader of third world countries.
Right.
or set the example for third world countries. Now,
not everybody has to be the United
developing
States, you know?
countries, if you want to be politically correct about the term. But Yugoslavian nationalism, I think it's important to note this, that Yugoslavian nationalism masked the development of the ethnic nationalisms there. So to get back to Bosnia, the constant redrawing of Bosnia's borders had meant that ethnicity in the region became more based on religion rather than a national origin. Thus,
That's right.
A Serb who converted to like Roman Catholic Christianity was considered a Croatian, while a Croatian who converted to Eastern Orthodoxy was considered a Serb. And to both groups, converts to Islam appeared to be collaborators with the Ottoman Turks. So it was like this weird thing where like ethnicity and religion kind of combined. It crossed boundaries. And during Tito's dictatorship, the country's three major ethnic groups, so Serbs, Croats, Muslims, Muslims were considered an ethnic group. They coexisted somewhat peacefully, but after Tito's death, or even after Tito's death in 1980, the party adopted this collective leadership model with the party rotating its presidency. So every single year you would have
Everybody gets a
different
turn.
president. Everyone gets. You get a Serb president, you get a Slovene president, you get a Croat. So the different groups were represented in the executive office, but the party's influence declined, and the party began to move to a more federal structure, giving more power to party branches in the different republics that made up Yugoslavia. So Milosevic becomes president of the League of Communists in Serbia in 1987, and he combines these certain Serbian nationalist ideologies with opposition to liberal reforms. And when communism fell in 1989, only Serbia and Montenegro voted for communist governments, while all the other republics voted against it. So Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia, Bosnia, they sought their independence, and Croatia and Slovenia declared their independence in 1991, forcing Bosnia to choose between independence or just a diminished role in a Serb-dominated Yugoslavian state. So that leads to them voting for their independence in March of 1992, which what?
No, go ahead, finish your thought, and then I had something on this.
So their vote for independence is what kind of kicks off this vicious civil war, in which Yugoslavia's Serbian president sought to keep all ethnically Serbian areas under Serbian control.
I wanted to point something out that's interesting in this timeline, because you're right that there was a party influence decline and a move to a federalist structure around this time as well. But there's also a lot of things going on that I think we decided to not go into great detail on right now. But I do want to point out, just kind of on the top end, this wasn't entirely just an internal shift. There's also external influences on this shift, generally speaking, that does help with this change. In particular, United States influence in this through our foreign aid programs definitely played a pretty big part into it. And I don't want to go too deeply into this, and maybe we will save this for a different episode if you guys are interested, but there is a 1991 Foreign Appropriations Act, which was kicked off in 1990 by George Bush, where effectively George Bush went to Congress to cut off aid and credit to Yugoslavia, and at the time, in the early 70s or 80s, just before, like 20 years before that, Yugoslavia started opening up their government to Western capital, which obviously creates IMF influence into it, and of course IMF debt, and that causes austerity measures and demands from the IMF. There is some external components to this that's separate and distinct from the ethnic issues that we're talking about here. But I didn't want to give our listeners the impression that this is entirely just an internal shift. That there was a lot of externalities placed on this that definitely, I don't want to say that they caused it, because I'm not certain myself yet, but I definitely think that they played a role for sure. And in particular, this 1991 Foreign Appropriations Act stipulated that if you wanted aid, you have to declare independence from Yugoslavia, which, that might have just been the straw that breaks the camel's back there. But it's certain that economic incentive certainly plays a part in the way that these individual ethnic kind of states start to seek independence. And I think that's kind of important.
So I don't know the reason behind U.S. foreign policy to pursue a Balkanization measure against Yugoslavia. I'm not exactly sure what made them do that, or what is like the real reason why they wanted to do that. I think
I've read plenty of theories, but I don't think I feel comfortable enough to talk about them yet.
According to like the United States, they would just say that they're doing it because the Serbians are dominating the other groups right now, and they want peace and stability in the Balkan Peninsula, and that's why they wanted to pursue a policy of balkanizing the region and dividing the region up, and that's why they were holding the carrot in front of these other nations. I think that's the reason on paper for U.S. policy. I'm not sure if there's another policy that underlines that. There probably is one that's probably a little bit more selfish than that. So
like I said, I've read a lot of different theories about this, and I just don't feel confident enough in what the actual truth is, or at the very least, I don't feel confident enough in talking about the competing narratives around why the United States pursued this type of policy. Maybe we can follow up on another episode, but I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about the breakup of Yugoslavia, that we weren't focusing so hard on just the internal ethnic makeup and the role that played, which admittedly was a large reason, but there was a lot of foreign external influence that definitely played a big part into why Yugoslavia fell.
Yeah. Well, another thing was just because of let me just pull this back. Even if there was outside influence, and we talk about this with like Syria and Iraq and different countries in the Middle East, where there was a very clear policy to break up these countries into sectarian nations, like to break them, create not in I guess in a combination of ethnicity and religion. Middle East, they want to break up states into a Shia state, a Sunni state, and a Kurdish state, and mainly that is to deal with Israeli influence, like to make sure there's no other strong country in the region that can compete with Israel militarily.
I'm not so certain that this is the case in Yugoslavia, though. I don't think anybody was particularly worried about Yugoslavia being a local powerhouse, disrupting that. I think I don't want to. I almost don't want to say it because I know that some stuff that I read feels kind of conspiracy theorist.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that even if there is external actors who are trying to break a country up, doesn't mean that ticking time bomb wasn't there in the first place.
That's right. I agree with that fully. Yeah,
so
you're right.
And let's just use Syria as an example. And, there was a very clear international effort to divide the country. So look at the Kurdish region up north right now. I mean, basically, the Idlib province is still kind of balkanized with radical Salafists. But those divisions in the country were already there. And the way that country was set up, its power structure is that there's minority groups that banded together and dominate the majority group. So the minority group being this, like Sunnis are, I think, around 70% of the population in Syria, or 60 to 70%. I don't know the exact number, but somewhere between that. And the people who hold all the power levers, or at least did hold the power levers, are the Alawites, which are kind of like cryptic Christians. They're Muslims who celebrate Jesus and celebrate Christmas. They drink and stuff like that. And that's Assad's family, and then they're allies with the Christians, and they're allies with the Druze, and they're allies with the Shias, and they form a coalition. They band together against the Sunnis, which causes the Sunnis to band together. So that's the reason why groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1980s in Syria, the Muslim Brotherhood was like, the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria is like unique in terms of the Muslim Brotherhood. Like, they were a lot more radical and violent and bigger in Syria than they were in other countries. And what fostered the creation of a Muslim Brotherhood that took that form, because in other countries, the Muslim Brotherhood's not really necessarily violent at all. Like, a lot of them are just like rich guys, or like rich landowners, and that's like their political vehicle. But the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria was very violent and very radical. But what fostered that, I think, was just the political system that was set up.
Yeah. Will you indulge me in a quick conspiracy or fun topic that hits home? And in the top of this podcast, you said sometimes people mention that balkanization may be a solution, or perhaps just an inevitability here in the United States for people to just straight up not kill each other, because we're so politically fractured and culturally fractured as a nation, or at least that's the pessimist way to look at it. Would you say that efforts like social media manipulation are ways to are external influences to try and get us to balkanize faster, much like how because we already have the political conditions and the ticking time bomb, so to speak, internally. We just need that kind of external influence to push us over the edge. Do you think that that's perhaps relevant to this conversation?
I don't know. Why? Who do you think's that external influence? Social media?
Well, if you want to ask the liberals, it's Russia and, doing bots on Facebook and shit. But, it's different with the United States because, it's as far as like external influences on other countries go, we're like the number one perpetrator there. So it's kind of hard to, come after the king in that respect. Like we're the top dog in that respect.
Well, what's interesting is that the U.S. has like the largest track record of meddling in other people's elections and fostering this type of division within the countries. And when it comes to Russia, Russia has had their own problems with Russia's a humongous country. It's not homogeneous at all. Look at look at their own wars throughout the 1990s in Chechnya. It can happen anywhere. But to go back to the conspiracy of outside or people who want to balkanize the United States, I don't think that anyone wants to balkanize the United States who's in power. I don't think that is a goal for anyone, because I think the powers that be, they need the United States as a whole to keep the power afloat. They need a tax base. They need this giant country to keep all of our programs running. like to keep, you know, all the power levers in place, you wouldn't be able to. I don't think you'd really be able to have like a Fed or have just this massive spending without a population of 300 and whatever million people. What are we? 320 million people now? 350 million people now? 330, whatever that is, with like a large capital of people who are educated and who are able to provide enough labor and services that back up the U.S. dollar. I don't think that the powers that be want that system to go away at all. There's a lot of reasons why people are so divided in the United States right now. I think a lot of it has to do with income inequality, and I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. And then very different cultural values in different parts of the country, and like in urban centers and in more rural areas. You know what makes people so radical? It's just the levers of power. Like, people become way more intense into politics whenever there's a presidential election. Like, that's when people really start to care, and that's because, you know, their team could become president and they can have their guy in power. But I think it's government that just makes everyone so like having control of the levers of power and being able to, you know, push your agenda, whatever that be. What makes
more of a reason for, you know,
so
for our
secularized,
adversaries,
and so
more of a reason for our adversaries to try and do things to balkanize us, because, you know, that would effectively weaken the United States and their hegemony. Just a thought.
Yeah, sure, why not? I think we do a pretty good job on that on our own, though. That's the thing.
We're doing.
Like, I don't think we
job by
need
ourselves.
foreign. Honestly, if there were like foreigners who were really blatantly doing that, then at least we'd have some common enemy or something like that to produce nationalism. Hey, when after 9/11, and, you know, I strongly disagree with all the policies that were made after 9/11 and the policies that led to 9/11. However, come on, man, you would drive down the street and every single house in the most liberal area in New York would have American flags. They look like you look like you were, you know, driving down rural Kentucky or something like that.
That's right.
All the patriotic paraphernalia that would be hanging outside people's doors, and like even the most like liberal areas like Park Slope. It's really, you know, people were holding doors to. I mean, people still do that. People are still generally nice. You know, I live in like a very progressive part of this country, and, you know, I'm not super progressive or anything like that, but I don't go outside and fight people over politics at all. Like, I get along with pretty much everyone, no matter what their politics are, even if I like strongly disagree. Like, most people in America are nice, generous people who don't, who are not trying to like get into fights over politics. I think social media largely does that to us. Just because, like, there's so many different reasons. And I don't know, there's probably people who are more well-spoken than I am who tackle these reasons why we're so divided. But I disagree. I don't think that there's a threat of a country of an external actor right now in America who's driving the polarization in the U.S. I really think that's our own.
That's what the Democrats of 2016 would have had you thought that it was Russia.
I mean, that's what the Republicans will have you think with China.
Yep.
So
we're just blaming external actors on our own.
If only we could just find a common enemy that we can all hate. Why can't we all just hate the same country? That's how we solve all these problems. We just got to find a common country to hate all together, and then we'll be a nation again. We'll be a nation.
I'm telling you, man. God. Don't preclude the disclosure event of aliens as being that catalyst for us all to just band together. Aliens will pop up, or maybe there are no aliens and they just make it up. You know.
Maybe it will be zombies. Who knows? Maybe
it could be zombies. Zombies is another good one.
Maybe everyone who took the vaccine will turn into a zombie, and then the unvaccinated will be the ones who fight them off.
Right. Well, the anti-vaxxers sure would like that situation. Yeah. I think they'd have the biggest "I told you so."
They'd have the best immune systems.
Yeah.
All right. So let's just get back
to Yugoslavia.
to the Yugoslavia. All right, because we kind of went off the rails. So let's get back actually to the current conflict, because I think we can go too far off the rails. And I would actually want to put a pin in this, and maybe we can talk about the escalation of like the actual breakup in future episodes. Would you want to do that?
Okay. Yeah, we can do that.
Because I know that I don't want to start getting into Kosovo, and like other.
And we're gonna have to if you want to talk about that action.
If we want to keep it going, because I think that'll be just too much in one episode. But we can kind of divide it if you guys are interested in doing a deeper dive into this subject. And this is more meant to be kind of like an intro to the conflict, just so everyone's like kind of on the same page when they listen to it. If we get into more, like deeper things that people have the base level understanding of the conflict. But I want to pull back to the Biden administration and the possible policies of why the United States actually does seem to have a more pro Bosnia policy, and the U.S. is currently threatening to put sanctions on the Bosnian Serbian leaders, the Republic of Srpska leaders. And it was interesting because during last election, Biden was trying to win votes from Bosnian Muslim diasporas in the U.S. And he had a letter to the Bosnian Muslim diaspora entitled "Joe Biden's Vision for America's Relationship with Bosnia Herzegovina." And
hold on, before you continue.
He wrote,
Wait, before you continue, this feels a lot to me like that one episode that we did when we looked at Trump's website to see like the types of cultural groups that he was going after, and we found out that he was like, courting the Chaldeans. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So this feels a lot like that.
That's the fact exactly that, what it is.
I mean, I have no idea what the population of Bosnian Muslims are in the U.S., but I can almost bet, based on our analysis of Trump's courting the Chaldeans here in the United States, that this group of people probably made up some important district in some important swing state somewhere. I can probably bet on that.
So I'm not sure where there is a high population of Bosniak Muslims in the United States that would swing an election.
I don't either.
Michigan?
But when we looked
I'm
up,
assuming like a place like Michigan or Wisconsin, or we'd have
Detroit,
to look that
maybe,
up.
I don't know.
I'm presuming a Rust Belt state.
Yeah,
those were.
I mean, when we did this on the Chaldeans. When we did this on the Chaldeans, I didn't even know that Chaldeans still existed, right? It turned out to be that they were like an area. They held some sway in like Detroit area, right? And that was Trump trying to flip Detroit, in his favor.
That could be that. The Chaldeans, for record, are like descendants of like the Babylonians, right?
Right. They're like some ancient peoples that you would read about in the Bible that I had no idea still existed at this point. Yes, but there's a mega delay. So,
but they're the descendants of the Babylonians, right?
Yeah.
Did you say it? Did you just answer that? Sorry, there's a mega delay. We're starting to have internet issues, so we might wrap this up. But it's interesting because he had a letter that he wrote to the diaspora, and he was just saying the main crux of the letter is like, hey, listen, Trump neglected this area. He didn't give a shit about it, and he doesn't care about our NATO allies anymore, and we want to get engaged back into this area. So vote for me. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more interest other than votes because it seems like insignificant. I bet if you looked it up, Bosniak Muslim votes, most likely would probably go to Biden anyway, right? Because I think most Muslims in America predominantly vote for Democrats. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but if I bet on that, that would be the case.
I just looked it up. As of the 2010 census, there's 125,793 Bosnian Americans, but Bosnian Americans doesn't necessarily mean Bosniaks, so it's a smaller proportion of those. And it's estimated that as the 2020 census, there's somewhere between 300 and 350,000 Americans who are either full or partial Bosnian descent living in the country. Again, that's not Bosniak Muslims, the specifics that we were talking about, but I did find something interesting is that the city of St. Louis, Missouri, and the metropolitan areas holds the largest proportion of them. So was St. Louis or Missouri generally one of those toss-up states? I forget.
No, not really. Missouri wasn't really up for grabs. Maybe on a pipe dream, because there's two large urban areas in Missouri, being Kansas City and then St. Louis. So maybe it is, but I'm pretty sure Missouri solidly goes red every single election, unless I'm mistaken about that. Maybe those elections are closer than I think they are.
Yeah. So it went very much red this time around 2020. It was he won by a 15.4% margin, which was actually lower, 3.1% lower than his 2016 margin, but it was still better than any nominee other than Ronald Reagan in 1984, any Republican in 1984. So it went very, very red, with the exception of the population centers, which, go figure, one of them is the St. Louis, which went to Biden. So yeah, maybe this is part of his that was part of his strategy.
Well, every urban center goes to Democrats usually. That's nothing new. I don't know. I feel like that's not. It's just a theory that it's one of the reasons is to gain support from the Bosnian Muslim diaspora. But I don't think that's big enough to really affect the.
Yeah, there's definitely something else going on.
There's definitely something else, and I guess I'd really have to ask someone who knows what they're talking about to get the lowdown and why the United States is why the Biden administration seems to be more interested in the Balkan regions and in Bosnia and all these countries. It could just be a NATO thing because a lot of these countries are potentially, there's some countries in NATO. Montenegro and Slovenia, I think, are both in NATO, and
all the Eastern countries are like I forgot geography. My geography sucks on this. I'm gonna look it up. Balkan NATO members. So Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia are all talking about, or were talking about it in 2002, and then 2004 they became part of NATO. And then if you're thinking about EU, which is what I was thinking about, EU Balkan states, all of the eastern ones are. So that is obviously Greece, but they're not necessarily not exactly part of it, but Bulgaria and Romania and Croatia. And if I'm missing one, apologies.
No, I think not all of them. I think that's it. A lot of these countries are. I think Macedonia is
North
on
Macedonia.
North Macedonia is on.
Otherwise, they're going to take over Greece.
Some of these countries are on pathways to EU membership, where they have to hit certain numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what those metrics are, but I think it was Macedonia. Man, I forget. Man, I'm terrible at memorizing things, but retaining information, but I think it was Macedonia who's been on like a 10-year plan or something like that. And then, or it might have been
right. I think I read
Montenegro
that.
who's on that plan. But a lot of these countries are trying to get their, you know what? I think it is Montenegro. They're trying to get their EU accession process, and they've applied back in 2008. But it's interesting though, because I think Europe cares less than America right now about what's going on in Serbia, or what's not Serbia, but what's going on right now with this possible secession. I think everyone's worn out.
Well, here's the reason why I think we might be interested here, and it has to do with the last conversation that we had about the border crisis in Poland and in Belarus, because if you remember from that episode, I talked about how the Belarusian armed forces had a training exercise with the Russians and the Serbians. And again, that's with the Serbian state, the actual country of Serbia, not the Serbian entity within Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? But kind of hard to deny that link there, because those Serbs would obviously be pretty closely aligned with the actual state of Serbia, and potentially that mythology idea of the greater state of Serbia. And since Serbia has that very close connection with Russia, and there is a current crisis in Belarus where at the very least it appears that Serbia would align with Belarus because they were doing training exercises with them, it makes sense that the U.S. would want to try to preempt any fucking about in Bosnia by Serbians, because that would present some security risks generally in the EU and for NATO in general. And I think that might have something to do with it, if I were to guess.
Yeah, I think you're on to something. Let's cover this in future episodes, because I want to uncover more, and I think there's more history that we need to go over anyway. Mm-hmm. But let us know if you want us to continue on this topic. I think it's a good thing to maybe concentrate on for the remainder of the year. As you guys know, Danny and I are both traveling over the next couple of months, or not months, like next couple of weeks. So Danny's moving to Puerto Rico, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, going to Puerto Rico. So Danny's moving, and then I'm going to I have some personal stuff I needed to take care of. So I'm not going to be available for the next week of Thanksgiving. So I think we're not going to have an episode. We're going to try to figure out times to record and get this thing up. So we plan on doing a couple of more episodes before the end of the year. We're just not exactly sure when we're going to be able to find time to record these episodes.
Right.
But we'll figure it out.
That'll also affect when they drop, too. So if you start seeing it come out on wonky days, that's probably why. But keep posted. We'll let you know.
But we're going to try our best to get episodes out there. So just hold. If you don't see one for maybe 2 weeks, just hold your keisters. We're working on it. It's just a matter of finding time to record them. And then... we'll try our best. But let us know if you want us to continue taking this topic down. We're also planning some episodes on the Korean War. So if you guys want us to concentrate on this, we can push the Korean War episodes to, I guess, after we finish these. And then we can just take it from there. Anything else to add?
Nope.
All right. Peace, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Peace.
And if you want to support the show, rate and review the podcast. That is the number one way to support the show. Back to Bosnia Kovaglav. Bosnia Kovaglav.